Good afternoon, or if it is good morning where you are watching these slides, to all of the ENGL 221 students. This week we are busy with study unit 3. We are in week 3 and we will again discuss and conclude our discussion on the yellow wallpaper. As many of us will be returning to our respective schools this coming Monday, the 26th, I would like to read a very special verse to you from Proverbs 22nd, verse 6. Train up a child in the way he should go. Even when he is old, he will not depart from it. And we know as Christians that the way we want to train up a child in the way he should go is the way of the Lord. Keep that in mind, because as teachers, you are also a vessel for the word of God. Now let us pray together, and I pray for us a very special prayer, especially for teachers. Lord, bless my students and help them as they grow. May I teach them faithfully the things they need to know, so they may face the future knowing they're prepared, and when they think of school days, may they know their teacher cared. Amen. On our work schedule, we are in week 3. We are discussing study unit 3. We continue with the yellow wallpaper. On our assessment schedule, I want to draw your attention to your assessment activity 2. Please note that it has 2 parts. There will be an e-quiz that you will be able to complete between the 2nd and the 6th of August, and then also some short questions which you will be able to submit between the 2nd to the 6th of August. Now, very important, the template that you must use for those short questions, and you will submit it on Turnitin. That template will be available from this coming Monday, the 26th of July, on eClass. Your assessment activity 2 will of course be questions on the yellow wallpaper. The assessment will consist of 2 sections. There is your e-quiz for 10 marks that you will be able to complete between the 2nd and the 6th of August, and then also some short questions for 20 marks that you must do on a template and submit on Turnitin. You must also submit it between the 2nd and the 6th of August, but the template will already be available from this coming Monday, the 26th. Now, for your e-quiz and the submission of the short questions on Turnitin, it will open on Monday, Monday the 2nd of August at 7 in the morning and close on Friday the 6th of August, 11 at night, and total marks for this assignment is 30. Let us look at the outcome and assessment criteria for study unit 3. Outcome: understand the themes, motives and symbols of a short story. Assessment criteria: understand the structure of writing based on literary analysis, be able to recognize themes and motives in the text, and understand how to relate them to an essay using additional external sources. Answer a variety of questions in preparation for critically analyzing the text. Be able to answer paragraph or essay type questions in which you relate key literary terms to the short story as a way of discussing themes and motives. Before we begin, it is always good to know what a critical analysis is. Let's first see what it is not. It is not an evaluation. You are not evaluating the story or the book as being good or bad. It is, however, uncovering meaning. How did the author communicate the theme or the message? If you want to read a little bit more, please refer to your study guide on page 22. So what is the purpose of a literary analysis? Why do we do it? First of all, if done correctly, it will give you and the reader a deeper understanding of the text. It helps you to create a clear and cohesive argument by using proof from the text. And you can again refer to your study guide on page 22, which describes it in more detail. But what is a critical analysis or a literary analysis? A literary critical analysis explains a work of fiction, poetry, or drama by means of interpretations. The goal of the literary analysis is to broaden and deepen your understanding of a work of literature. It is also the most common type of essay that we use in this field of academic study. Now, in the previous slide, remember, the explanation said that a critical literary analysis will give you an understanding of text by means of an interpretation. So how do you gain that interpretation? Now, literary devices, remember we discussed that in Unit 1. It was those literary techniques plus arguments and literary devices that will give you an interpretation. So I hope now you can see why we discussed the literary devices. And please refer back to study Unit 1 if you are unclear on what a literary device is. But what exactly is an interpretation? Firstly, an interpretation is an individual response that addresses meaning. So each of us will have a different response to the text that we read. If we take the yellow wallpaper, for example, if I read it and I had suffered from postpartum depression myself, I would have a much different response to the text than someone who had not, or even someone who does not have children yet. But are all interpretations equal? No, definitely not. You are going to write your critical analysis, and in it you will show me what your interpretation of the story is. But are all interpretations equal? No, definitely not. Your interpretation is only as strong as the proof that you can provide for me of your interpretation, or proof that supports your interpretation. So you must provide an argument. You must base that argument on examples and quotations from the text. You can also use your knowledge about the context of the text. So here, for example, if you are someone who had suffered from postpartum depression, you can use that knowledge to support your argument. And you must convince me of your interpretation. Now, when you are writing your analysis, giving your interpretation, it's very important that you must remember to carefully structure it in the order in which you address certain aspects of your argument. Don't jump from one idea to the next. There must be cohesive and logical paragraphs, and each paragraph must contain only one idea with its supporting evidence. You may also quote secondary sources that have analyzed the text before you, and please refer to your study guide, page 23, to read a bit more about this. Now, it can be quite daunting to write a literary analysis, but here are 8 steps that you can follow to guide you through this process. Number 1, read, formulate an opinion, and then a working thesis. Now, a thesis is that one sentence that states what your literary analysis is all about. Number 2, reread and then make notes about the characters, the major events, symbols, setting, and stylistic elements. Stylistic elements here are those literary elements that we discussed in Unit 1. Number 3, consult secondary sources, but only if necessary. This is where you would consult those videos about the yellow wallpaper, those articles that was also loaded for you on eClass. Number 4, make notes, and then more importantly, organize the following. The issues, those would be the conflicts, the themes, and the motives. And remember to support all 3 of those with relevant quotes from the passage. Number 5, quote often, but remember that your quotes must be short, and they must be relevant, and they must be linked to your thesis. Number 6, remember to write in the present tense, and then analyze your own ideas. Ask yourself, so what? What does this suggest about humans? What is the author's message? What does this mean? Number 7, when you write with both the text and your argument or your opinion in mind. And then lastly, number 8, before you hand in, revise your own work, pay particular attention to grammar and spelling. You could even ask someone else to assist you with this. In your paragraph 1, your introduction, you will have some kind of hook, something to get your reader to want to read the rest of your essay. You will mention the author and the title. You will give some essential background. You will give a brief plot synopsis, not the entire story, please. and then your argument, your thesis statement, what your entire piece is about. And your thesis statement is the theme that you get out of the literary piece. And you can refer to your study guide, page 23, which explains it in a bit more detail. Examples of hooks that you can use, and we'll look at each of them separately just now as well. You could use startling facts, meaningful quotations, rich descriptions, or universal ideas. So here is an example of a startling fact that is used as the hook for your introductory paragraph. One recent study found that 1 in 7 women may experience PPD in the year after giving birth, with approximately 4 million live births occurring each year in the United States. This equates to almost 600,000 postpartum depression diagnoses. The Yellow Wallpaper by Charlotte Perkins Gilman addresses the issue of postpartum depression and mental illness through the chilling secret journal of the narrator. Through it, the reader gets a glimpse of the downward spiral of mental instability when PPD and other health issues are left in the hands of a society that does not understand the nature of these disorders. We now look at a meaningful quotation that could be used as a hook for your introductory paragraph. There's a lot of misunderstanding. There are a lot of people out there that think that it's not real, that it's not true, that it's something that's made up in their minds. Oh, it's hormones. They brush it off. It's something that's completely uncontrollable. It's really painful and it's really scary, and women need a lot of support. And this was by Hayden Panettiere. She is a famous actress who suffered from postpartum depression herself. Let's look at another example of a hook for your first paragraph, rich description. The woman is ill, but nobody believes her. She sits in a room with yellow wallpaper, unable to convince the men around her that her suffering is real. You see, he does not believe I am sick, she writes of her doctor husband. And then finally, there's also the universal idea that could be used as a hook for your first paragraph. A young newly married woman who recently gave birth writes a journal while away in a mansion at the height of felicity. Felicity means happiness or joyfulness. But is this a picture of happiness or a dim look into the oppression of women in marriage and society? Charlotte Perkins Gilman's short story, The Yellow Wallpaper, is a commentary on the treatment of women and their lack of power in a society ruled by men. This would be a universal idea because it would be something that women and men could still understand even in today's day and age. Your thesis statement, now that is the sentence that describes what your entire essay or your entire literary analysis will be about. It is the overall opinion. It relates to the theme. It suggests how the author reveals meaning to you, and also include a literary element in your thesis statement, something like symbol, for example, that communicates the theme. Please refer back to Study Unit 1 if you are unclear on what a literary element is. So now that you have your introduction, what will the body paragraph structure of your literary essay be like? First of all, remember that you must get all of the evidence from the piece, from the text, and it must support the thesis. When you are writing it, it must support your thesis. But what is the format? The format will usually look like this. You will have your topic sentence. You will have some kind of evidence, number 1, evidence number 2, and evidence number 3 to substantiate your claims. And you will have a concluding sentence. And please note that for all your evidence-based parts, there will be a lead-in sentence which you will then comment on. If you have a look at this diagram about your thesis statement, you will see that it is the star right up top. Everything flows from that thesis statement of yours. Your topic sentences that will link your body paragraphs to your thesis statement. Remember, everything in your analysis must link to your thesis statement. The quotes is how your research prove or support the claims that you make in those topic sentences, and then your own words that you use in those paragraphs. They will explain, comment on, and argue, and make your reader believe what you are writing. Now, your body paragraph structure. Let's look at the topic sentence first, because that is what you start with. It will identify the main theme or the thesis statement. It will explain what the body paragraph will discuss. So here's an example. The nursery walls are covered in putrid yellow wallpaper with a confused, eerie pattern. The narrator is horrified by it. And now, after that sentence, now follows your 3 examples to explain in a bit more detail with some quotes what you mean by this topic sentence. And how can you support or discuss your topic sentence? You must give textual evidence, meaning you must give evidence from the text. You could use quotes, references, or you could even paraphrase. Paraphrase is when you use your own words to rewrite a sentence or 2 sentences from the story, but you use your own words. Now remember, with your body paragraph structure, you start with a topic sentence and then you have your evidence. And your evidence must have a lead-in sentence or even a lead-in quote. Let's look at some examples. Why do we have these lead-in sentences or quotes? It prepares the reader for your argument and it informs the reader of the setting or the situation. Let's look at an example. Eventually, the narrator becomes a creeping woman. There's a quote. See that? The first indication is when she says rather startlingly, "I always lock the door when I creep by daylight." There's another lead-in quote. Later, the narrator and the creeping woman work together to pull off the wallpaper. So those 2 quotes that is indicated in red there for you, it prepared your reader for your argument and it informed the reader of what was going on. Now, very important, and following your lead-in quote or your lead-in sentence is your commentary. It is the most important part of the essay. This is what I want to know. What is your opinion and your commentary on a particular theme or opinion? It is your voice, your opinion. It's how the evidence supports the thesis or the thesis statement. And there must be twice as much commentary as the quotes. This is your interpretation and this is the point of the analysis. So it's very important that there must be much more, twice as much commentary. I want to know what your opinion is. It's not just a bunch of quotes that you've pieced together. What is your opinion? And how does this evidence support your thesis statement? Now, when we are doing any kind of writing, especially literary analysis in any language, it is very important that we transition from one idea to the next, or one paragraph to the next, or one sentence to the next in the correct way, in the grammatically correct way. And we will have a look at that quickly. Now, it is very important that you can in a grammatically correct way and in a logical way, transition from one idea to the next, from one sentence to the next, and even from one paragraph to the next. And here are some very useful transitional phrases that you can use. If we look, for example, at the first one, cause and effect, you can use words like accordingly, consequently, hence, so, therefore, thus. If we move on to, if you have an idea of similarity that you want to highlight, you can use transitional phrases such as also, in the same way, just as, so too, likewise, similarly. Please go through all of the others as well and make use of them when you are writing your literary analysis. Here are some more examples of transitional phrases you could use. If you want to, for example, show conclusion, the very last line here on the slide, you could say, finally, in a word, in brief, briefly, in conclusion, in the end, in the final analysis, on the whole, thus, to conclude, to summarize, in sum, to sum up, in summary. So there are many different transitional phrases that you could use. Lastly, your concluding sentence is your last sentence, and it concludes your idea, your main theme. Your concluding paragraph of your analysis, it is your last paragraph, and it must restate your thesis statement, but remember, not in the exact same words. You can broaden the discussion in your concluding paragraph to also include a kind of so what approach. And you could mention what is the relevance of your piece of writing, either universally or to you individually or personally. How can you do that? You can relate the essay to the literary work itself or to literary work in general. You can make predictions on how the theme is going to change in society. You can connect your last paragraph to the opening. And you can comment on the value of the work to people or to society. You could even give a biblical perspective. Now remember, you will not do all of these things. Most often it will only be one of these you will use to conclude your essay in your last paragraph. When you are writing your analysis, please remember to always cite your sources. Remember, in-text referencing, bibliography is very important. Use the present tense. Use transitions, use the third person, and remember, since it is academic writing, we use formal language and we punctuate correctly. All right, we are going to look at an essay, a critical analysis of the yellow wallpaper. See if you can spot those things that we discussed, the introductory paragraph, what hook is used to hook the reader. If you can see what the topic is for each paragraph, how it is discussed, what are the leading sentences or the leading quotes, how the transitional phrases are used to jump from one idea to the next or one paragraph to the next, and how the literary analysis is concluded in the end. Analysis of the Yellow Wallpaper by C. Perkins Gilman. Like Kate Chopin's The Story of an Hour, Charlotte Perkins Gilman's The Yellow Wallpaper is a mainstay of feminist literary study. First published in 1892, the story takes the form of secret journal entries written by a woman who is supposed to be recovering from what her husband, a physician, calls a nervous condition. This haunting psychological horror story chronicles the narrator's descent into madness, or perhaps into the paranormal, or perhaps, depending on your interpretation, into freedom. The result is a story as chilling as anything by Edgar Allan Poe or Stephen King. Better health through infantilization. There is your first idea, the first argument in this literary analysis. The protagonist's husband, John, does not take her illness seriously, nor does he take her seriously. He prescribes, among other things, a rest cure, in which she is confined to their summer home, mostly to her bedroom. There was your leading sentence leading into the arguments that will be discussed in the following paragraphs. The woman is discouraged from doing anything intellectual, even though she believes some excitement and change would do her good. She must write in secret, and she is allowed very little company, certainly not from the stimulating people she most wishes to see. In short, John treats her like a child, calling her diminutive names like blessed little goose and little girl. He makes all decisions for her and isolates her from the things she cares about. His actions are couched in concern for her, a position that she initially seems to believe herself. He is very careful and loving, she writes in her journal, and hardly lets me stir without special direction. Her words also sound as if she is merely parroting what she's been told, and hardly lets me stir seems to harbour a veiled complaint. Even her bedroom is not the one she wanted. Instead, it's a room that appears to have once been a nursery, thus emphasizing her return to infancy. Its windows are barred for little children, showing again that she is being treated as a child and also that she is like a prisoner. Here now the second argument that is discussed in this particular literary analysis, fact versus fancy, and here's the leading sentence. John dismisses anything that hints of emotion or irrationality, what he calls fancy. For instance, when the narrator says that the wallpaper in her bedroom disturbs her, he informs her that she is letting the wallpaper get the better of her and thus refuses to remove it. John doesn't simply dismiss things he finds fanciful. He also uses the charge of fancy to dismiss anything he doesn't like. In other words, if he doesn't want to accept something, he declares that it is irrational. When the narrator tries to have a reasonable talk with him about her situation, she is so distraught that she is reduced to tears. But instead of interpreting her tears as evidence of her suffering, he takes them as evidence that she is irrational and can't be trusted to make decisions for herself. He speaks to her as if she is a whimsical child imagining her own illness. Bless her little heart, he says. She shall be as sick as she pleases. He does not want to acknowledge that her problems are real, and so he silences her. The only way the narrator could appear rational to John would be to become satisfied with her situation. Therefore, there is no way for her to express concerns or ask for changes. In her journal, the narrator writes, John does not know how much I really suffer. He knows there is no reason to suffer, and that satisfies him. John can't imagine anything outside his own judgment, so when he determines that the narrator's life is satisfactory, he imagines that the fault lies with her perception of her life. It never occurs to him that her situation might really need improvement. Here now is the third argument or opinion discussed in this literary analysis, the wallpaper, and here is its leading sentence. The nursery walls are covered in putrid yellow wallpaper with a confused, eerie pattern. The narrator is horrified by it. She studies the incomprehensible pattern in the wallpaper, determined to make sense of it. But rather than making sense of it, she begins to discern a second pattern, that of a woman creeping furtively around behind the first pattern, which acts a prison for her. The first pattern of the wallpaper can be seen as the societal expectations that hold women like the narrator captive. The narrator's recovery will be measured by how cheerfully she resumes her domestic duties as wife and mother, and her desire to do anything else, like write, is seen to interfere with that recovery. Though the narrator studies the pattern in the wallpaper, it never makes any sense to her. Similarly, no matter how hard she tries to recover, the terms of her recovery, embracing her domestic role, never make any sense to her either. The creeping woman can represent both victimization by the societal norms and resistance to them. This creeping woman also gives a clue about why the first pattern is so troubling and ugly. It seems to be peppered with distorted heads with bulging eyes, the heads of other creeping women who were strangled by the pattern when they tried to escape it. That is, women who couldn't survive when they tried to resist cultural norms. Gilman writes that nobody could climb through that pattern. It strangles so. So here we have the next argument of this literary analysis, becoming a creeping woman, and here is the leading sentence, the introduction. Eventually, the narrator becomes a creeping woman. The first indication is when she says rather startlingly, I always lock the door when I creep by daylight. Later, the narrator and the creeping woman work together to pull off the wallpaper. The narrator writes, there are so many of those creeping women, and they creep so fast, so the narrator is one of many. That her shoulder just fits into the groove on the wall is sometimes interpreted to mean that she has been the one ripping the paper and creeping around the room all along. But it could also be interpreted as an assertion that her situation is no different from that of many other women In this interpretation, the yellow wallpaper becomes not just a story about one woman's madness, but a maddening system. At one point, the narrator observes the creeping woman from her window and asks, "I wonder if they all came out of the wallpaper as I did." Her coming out of the wallpaper, her freedom, coincides with a descent into mad behavior, ripping off the paper, locking herself in her room, even biting the immovable bed. That is, her freedom comes when she finally reveals her beliefs and behavior to those around her and stops hiding. The final scene, in which John faints and the narrator continues to creep around the room, stepping over him every time, is disturbing but also triumphant. Now John is the one who is weak and sickly, and the narrator is the one who finally gets to determine the rules of her own existence. She is finally convinced that he only pretended to be loving and kind. After being consistently infantilized by his prescriptions and comments, she turns the tables on him by addressing him condescendingly, if only in her mind, as "young man." John refused to remove the wallpaper, and in the end, the narrator used it as her escape. In your preparation for Study Unit 4, Week 4, please work through your Study Unit 3, that's in your activity pack. Have a look at the memorandum of Study Unit 2, the work you did there. It's also in your activity pack. Read Study Guide, page 26 to 27. If you haven't already, now's the time to read the short story, Was It Heaven or Hell? It was already uploaded in the first week of this module. And then start working on your assessment activity 2, because remember, the template for those short questions will already be available from this coming Monday. May you have a very good week. Those of you who are going back to school, enjoy it and stay safe and healthy.